it's our responsibility to humble ourselves. Jesus always says, "He that humbles himself." He places the responsibility on the person concerned. Humility is not a nice religious emotion. As a matter of fact, humility really doesn't operate primarily in the area of the emotions. Sometimes we try to feel humble, and we almost pinch ourselves to see if we're really feeling humble enough. That's a mistake. Humility is not in the area of the emotions. Humility is in the area of the will, and it's expressed in action. We can humble ourselves by a decision of our wills. No one else can do the same that we must do for ourselves. This is stated more than once in the New Testament. For instance, in James chapter 4 and verse 10, "Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up." You notice again the same law is at work. The way up is down. Start by going down, you'll end by going up. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Notice there, humble yourselves. Don't ask somebody else to do it. And again, in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 5 and 6, "Clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." Again, the same emphasis. Humble yourselves. You have to do it. And again, the same guarantee that if you do humble yourself, God will lift you up. Peter uses there a metaphor from putting clothes on. He says, "Clothe yourselves with humility." That's a vivid metaphor because it expresses the fact that normally a person clothes himself. He does not expect somebody else to do it for him. So we are required to clothe ourselves with humility. In Philip's translation, he brings out a very important point. He says, "Wear the overall of humility in serving one another," because that word that's translated "clothe yourselves" refers to a particular garment, a particular type of apron, which in the time of the New Testament was a distinctive garment worn only by slaves. So what Peter says is, put on the garment that indicates you're a slave. Put on the overall that indicates you're there to serve. And that is clothing yourself with humility. So you see that always it's a decision of our will that's expressed in the way we behave. Now God can create circumstances in order to help us to humble ourselves, but only we can make the right response. Notice what is said here in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 2 and 3, about the way that God dealt with Israel in the wilderness after he'd brought them out of Egypt. "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the desert these 40 years, to humble you and to test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." So, because God needed to deal with pride in Israel after they'd been redeemed out of Egypt, he created a special situation. He put them in the wilderness, and he made them dependent upon him in the most clear and obvious way for their water that they drank, for their food that they ate. He showed them their total dependence upon him. In this sense, he humbled them. He created a situation in which the reasonable response would have been for them to humble themselves, to acknowledge their total dependence upon God. But an interesting historical fact is this, that the majority of the Israelites never really learned that lesson. So though God humbled them, they did not humble themselves. And that's something that we all need to lay hold of. God can create the situation and the circumstances. God can help us. But only we can really humble ourselves. It rests with a decision of our wills. Humility, then, is a decision of the will. This decision, having been made, must be expressed in the appropriate action.